on those stories involving asylum seekers.
Yeah.
That £100 a week, could you please, could you leave the hotel? You're costing us £145 a night, and where you can cost us only £35 a night if you're in rented accommodation, or you can cost just £100 a week if you move in with your mate. Please, can you do that? This is similar to the, yes, I know you shouldn't have been released by accident, or you're supposed to be deported, but if we give you 500 quid, and by the way, that guy, the Ethiopian, he got 500 quid to go on the plane, he was done, because he could have got up to £2,000. The Home Office allows for up to £2,000 to pay people to get on planes, to not cause a fuss and get them, have the flight, stopped and the things, all that stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, we are bribing people to do things that they should be legally required to do anyway.
Yeah, if you pay the Dane Guild, it doesn't mean the Danes go away. They keep coming back because they think, free money. And that's literally what this is. And I also don't like the idea of saying, well, we should be putting them to work and stuff like that for their fortune. So what, we're going to be paying them effectively for the work that they've been doing, then a subsistence existence, which is tantamount actually to slave labour, if we're honest, given the amount of money that they're being given for that wage. That's immoral. But then they'll turn around and say, but they've been working, so that helps their cause to stay in the first place. So it's kind of like, so if you do a little bit of slave labour on the side, then you'll get your papers signed, and you'll get to, like, how does that work morally? And it's not what anybody wants. It's not really even what they want, if we're being honest.
They're too busy working anyway. They're making better money on Uber Eats.
Exactly. There are other ways that they're coming into the country illegally, and them working illegally, they can do a lot better. As you say, people want them sent home. They don't want them in hotels. They don't want them in their communities. If it's a question of either or, they'll have them in the hotels, because that is better than having them with their mates or just in a random housing accommodation. I genuinely would rather have it. I'd rather know that that's where the local people. Although let's face it, they're probably all over. I mean, again, I say I've got Asylum Hotel just a 10-minute walk from my home, but I'm guessing, other than the 80 blokes in there that are hanging around on the street outside, I'm guessing that there are more of those people living in neighbouring. There's loads of council flats near me, and I'm sure they're in them. All of this is foot dragging, so that they don't have to address what people want, which is to send them home, because they shouldn't be here in the first place.
Did you read it? I mean, I've been away, but I always like to keep up on the news. My brilliant friend Alison Pearson at the Telegraph, a fantastic interview with a woman who works as an asylum, basic assessor, and said the pressure that is on them to, even if someone has been, accused or convicted of serious sexual offences, to grant asylum. Certainly certain countries, look, we can't send them back to here or here. You're just going to have to get them off the books. And the Home Office basically, they say they would rather just have them off the books, take them off, and then we're told, see, these people are legitimate, because otherwise they wouldn't be having such a high rate of success in terms of actually winning asylum or winning their appeal for asylum. Whereas in fact the truth is, we are setting such a low bar for allowing people to stay in our country.
It's quicker and cheaper to just wave them through than to try and send them back, and because sending them back is expensive and sounds like hard work.
It's quicker and cheaper in the short term.
Of course, in the short term.
Long term,
to the people
we're going to pay
making
for these people for the rest of their lives.
But of course, we also had the phenomenon, didn't we, of them saying, right, well, we're going to prioritise women and children's applications because they're the most vulnerable and they're more likely to be approved. They did that, and of course, lots of them were approved, at which point they then turn around and say, see, the majority of people who apply for asylum get approved for it. And it's that kind of fiddling of the stats and the processes that I think really annoys people.
Reported by the BBC, by the way, leads us back full circle.
It really annoys people, because people can see what's happening in real time.
Stupid.
We're not stupid. I know that they'd love to think that we're stupid, and we can occasionally be a little stupid.
Well, and we've got to remember, and we're racist as well.
We are, just a little bit.
This comes back to, again, the debate over, where we're sort of, well, what do you do? As our last guest says, Paul Richards, what do? You've got 80,000 people. Yeah, and why have we got 80,000 people? Because when anyone tried to raise the issue of illegal migration, Nigel Farage, I mean, speaking at the moment, doing a press conference in Central London. I mean, it's a Monday. There's always a Reform press conference. But every time, I mean, he was the one who did the first filming out in the Channel, going, look, these boats are arriving. Hey guys, there's a problem here. Such outrage. These are asylum seekers. These are desperate men fleeing persecution. That was the line from the BBC and others. That was what was pushed. Talk to another refugee charity, and Geraldine from, it's always, or Esmeralda or whatever it is. There's always some posh bird who's decided to make her life about refugees and after leaving her boarding school.
An activist who is always portrayed as academic and specialist.
Yes, exactly. When actually they're just an activist. Or they run an organisation that they themselves set up as a one-man band. And then they treat these people as if they are experts in this field about this terrible lives these people lead. The reporting on this has been completely biased, and again, the BBC is at the forefront of that. When British people are going, are you sure about that? Because we're not sure about it. The refusal to push to no levels of crime. why shouldn't we know the nationality of the people or the immigration status of the people who are committing crimes in this country? I think that's perfectly relevant to know. No, it's bigoted. No, it's bigoted.
Yes,
to even want to know that, it's bigoted.
Exactly, to simply ask the questions and to not be given a good answer, just to be told, oh, well, that's dangerous for you to know the answer and you shouldn't be asking that question, rather than, well, there are X, Y, Z practical reasons why we haven't done it yet, but we'll look at maybe changing that in the future. It's never even that. It's simply, now, why would you want to know that sort of thing? It's just, why would you want to exercise?
Because I suspect there is a higher rate of sexual and you know, acquisitive crime and violent crime by young men from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Sudan and Ethiopia. And guess what? It turns out there is.
You'd think, if it wasn't true and we were all just fantastical bigots, they'd tell us, they'd give us the information. But they won't, because there might be something in it, and they don't want us to know that.
Exactly. It is extraordinary, isn't it? And again, I'm sorry, I think a lot of this, I think, you know, when you go back to conversations about the EU, about Brexit, you go back to conversations about the trans madness, the climate change insanity and net zero, and Israel and all of that. You come back to lockdown again and again and again. You've got the mainstream media, in inverted commas, but particularly led by the BBC, pushing an agenda. Now, they claim they're not pushing an agenda. It's the fact they don't even know they're doing it. It's the fact they don't know they're doing it. That's the bit which I find extraordinary. Yeah,
and I mean, it's the crossover, isn't it? Because, as I say, lying in our politics has become deeply ingrained. There's simply no point in actually expecting people to, pledge their manifestos and stick to it.
Although I hear David Lammy did terribly well at Deputy Prime Minister's questions last week.
Oh, faultless. But the point is, the people who enter, as I've said before, people who enter our politics in this country and the law and other professions, the BBC is the same. They draw from the same sorts of areas. And it's when you see the crossover between those industries and you understand, well, lying is deeply ingrained in this one, and this is from where the power stems. Why would it be different elsewhere in the BBC? They think it's acceptable in the pursuit of some higher goal, because that's their ideology.
Well, educating us mortal,
those of us who didn't.
Heathen bigots.
Yeah.
Who just drug
didn't go to the right school or the right university.
I always say, see, it's Adam Bolton when he was at Sky News. We had a lunch. I go, babe, I was in the lobby in the House of Commons, and him saying to me, but you're a Brexiteer, and he actually said, but you're one of us. You're one of us.
One of us. That was nice.
You're one of us.
At least you felt accepted.
But you're educated. And you're one of us. You must know better. It was like, you must be lying, or. I mean, that was the attitude.
But I mean,
that's such an extraordinary attitude to have to someone who doesn't share your political views.
Again, to sort of come through the education system of this country, which at its highest level is almost supposedly the best in the world, and for there to be a lack of criticism, a lack of critical thought, the idea that everybody must surely come to the same conclusion. That's where you kind of sat there going, it's not just the BBC or politics. That, in fact, is where the problem lies.
Am I guilty of it in the same way over things like Israel and trans, where it's like, well, how could you not come to the same conclusion that men can't become women and they can't get into women's spaces? How could you not come to the conclusion that the bad party, the overall bad party in the Israel-Gaza war is Hamas, not the IDF? I mean, are we not guilty of the same bias?
Well, we're not guilty of thinking the same thing as the majority, because clearly the majority do not think that at the BBC and in politics, because for a very long time we had to listen to the nonsense about the trans stuff as if we, in fact, were the lunatics. But the majority of people who, have not, in fact, been through Britain's sort of highest educational establishments, who kind of sit there and go, well, that just on a very fundamental basis doesn't make any sense. Actually, I'm more inclined to go with that, because, as is said, there are some things that only highly intelligent people could possibly believe, because you break down the different structures of how one it is that you construct.
They're not highly intelligent. They're supposedly highly educated. They're actually highly indoctrinated, and they don't realise.
No, I do think that intelligence plays a role in this. I don't think intelligence necessarily correlates to common sense at all.
I think the most. I know some people who are utterly brilliant. I say I couldn't trust them more than that.
It is a famous story about Einstein that he could never remember where he lived. He was off in his own world, and he would stand on the street thinking, now which house is mine? Now, fair enough, they all sort of look the same, but still there is that. So when it comes to highly intelligent people, I'm not saying everybody works at the BBC even approaches that, but that's from where it sort of stems from. You can go off at such tangents on all sorts of unbelievably insane, interesting theories, and it just takes you further and further away from reality. Marxism is a fantastic example of this.
Absolutely.
A fantastic example of how highly intelligent people can just warp their worldview by reading this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's very, very interesting. What do you make of Tim Davie and Deborah Turness resigning?
I mean, it's the headline, obviously, but it doesn't really scratch the surface. You know, you can. The thing is, Tim Davie could be incompetent. He could be highly talented. Either way, doesn't mean that he's the right person for the job. But does getting rid of this person solve the underlying issues? I would argue, obviously, not, because he was not, in fact, the one making these day-to-day decisions. Even if the buck does stop with him, the question now has to be: to what extent is this about bias and about prejudice within the organisation towards certain political causes or ideological causes, and also how much of it is incompetence? Because as much as I reckon that there is a degree of people using their own personal prejudices to push certain agendas, I suspect there's also rather a lot of people who don't really know that much about this sort of thing, or any of these sorts of things, and just sort of go along with things because that's what they're told to do, or that's what they think is the right thing to do.
But I think that goes right to the very top. I mean, Deborah Turness, the head of news, she, in internal memos, repeatedly told BBC News staff, make sure you make it clear to the viewers that you have to make a difference between the Hamas terrorists and the Hamas officials who run Gaza, because they're not the same. Yeah, they are, sweetheart.
Yeah,
they're exactly the same. If you are the head of news of supposedly the most trusted news organisation in the world, you're being paid a fortune by taxpayers, and you think that there are goodies in Hamas as opposed to just the baddies in Hamas. I'm sorry, you have no business being in that job.
Yeah, without meaning to sound slightly snobbish, I would question whether or not the intellectual capacity of many people at the BBC is quite what it was, say, 30 years ago. And I think that this is something that is perhaps reflected across society. You know, we talk at length about the dumbing down of, certain media ecosystems and universities, and actually, I think that that's probably reflected in society. It's certainly reflected in the calibre of our MPs, so why should it be any different in the BBC, which often draws a lot of its staff from the same sorts of pools of people? If these sorts of people, on the one hand, are not quite up to the job, why would we expect BBC staff?
I mean, look, these are highly educated, highly talented people. They've got very strong track records in other media or actually a lot of them. Well, a lot of them, actually. Tim, yes, but this is the interesting thing. I mean, even the three runners and riders, all women, of course they're women. I'm surprised it's not a drag queen. I'm sorry, I'm surprised it's not a Muslim drag queen that is being put forward as the obvious choice to replace Tim Davie as a DG. But the three women, and they are all, I mean, woke as woke can be. Of course they are, former Channel 4 boss, for goodness sake. But this was the thing, Tim Davie, he's been a loyal, all the stuff about him being a loyal public servant for years. He's paid over £500,000. We'll all be loyal for £500,000 sodding quid, Yes. But also, he was a PR man at Pepsi, right? He's a PR man at Pepsi, and then he moved into telly. The number one criterion for the next appointee to be director of the BBC is that they've never worked at the BBC.
Yeah.
That's as far as I'm concerned. Never having worked at the BBC would be the number one thing I would require. They've not got any loyalties. But here's the thing.
It has to be a white man with a moustache, is what you're saying.
You're saying it should. Who do we know who could possibly do that? Look, I've told this. Everyone says he's a nice guy, right?
Yeah.
Everyone says, I've told this story before I've told bits of this story before without actually saying the name of the person, because I felt there was an element of there was a private conversation. But I'm going to tell you the full conversation now. So a few months ago, I was at a social event where I saw Tim Davie, now outgoing Director General of the BBC, and in a very friendly chat, just the two of us, I said, I really wish you would get to the bottom of and get to grips with anti-Semitism at the BBC. And he said, there isn't anti-Semitism at the BBC. And I said, look, there is. I said, look, I'm not, and I said this very clearly, I'm not in any way implying that you are anti-Semitic, or that the bosses are anti-Semitic, or the presenters, the correspondents. I know a lot of those people. I think they're nice, good people, and they're professional people. I said, I think, though, that the anti-Semitism at the BBC, and again, he hasn't gone for this, he's gone for Trump, but the anti-Semitism at the BBC, I think, is far more dangerous. It's far more, I think it's immoral, it's dangerous. I said that I think the anti-Semitism is so ingrained, it's so part of the culture that you guys don't even realise it's there. It's so institutionalised, you can't see it. So I almost don't blame you for it, you can't see it. At which point, someone else walked by, and deliberately in front of that person's earshot, he said, "You're accusing me of being anti-Semitic." And I said, no. I categorically said I didn't think that you or other senior people at the BBC were anti-Semitic. And I actually forced him to clarify to the other person that I hadn't. I said, so I didn't say that. I've just said this to you. He was willing to totally distort what I had just said 30 seconds earlier to a third party.
Ironic, though.
To make me look like I had said something really quite outrageously rude to a fellow guest at this event. And that was the point when I thought, I thought you were a good guy who was doing his best and not doing very well. Now I think, well, from that moment on, I think, well, actually, no, I don't think you're a good guy. I think you are part of the problem, not part of the solution. And the whole, he's a Tory. You know, so was David Cameron. So were all the people who led the Ramon campaign, for goodness sake. Sod that. He's this idea that he's this nice guy who just hasn't been able to do the job to the best of his, to what we really wanted. It is not the case. Again and again and again, we've got all these cases where things have gone wrong and nothing is dealt with it until it's exposed. It was the Telegraph this week. Lots of the stuff going on has been exposed by the Sun newspaper as well. And, they only ever deal with anything once there's an outcry, once the culture secretary or someone comes down there. These are people who are totally and utterly unaccountable. Yeah. And yet we pay their wages.
And once again, you see the sort of the trend in British society, in the upper echelons of British society, which is never to admit, never to really apologise, to hide it as long as you can, and then maybe have an inquiry later. It'll be bogged down for a couple of years, at which point everybody's moved on to something else.
And also they will move. If they do have to go, they move on to another nice
job.
Little number.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing.
Tim Davey will be running Ofcom next.
There needs to be...
No, I'm not joking. He probably will.
That'll be, again, very ironic. But what there needs to be is, I don't want to say there needs to be root and branch reform at the BBC, because obviously there are going to be lots of areas that are fine because we're not necessarily, they're doing their job, they're not becoming the story. But I think, touching upon the anti-Semitism thing, and, you can put the Trump derangement thing to one side. Yeah. Lots of people have lost their minds over that. Fine, okay. I'm not saying that it should be allowed to continue, but it's not going to be an ongoing thing. We've got 3 more years of that maximum for it to matter. But the anti-Semitism thing, that is something that we have noticed at all levels of our society, driven especially increasingly, worryingly, by young people sort of entering the profession. That needs to be stamped on now. That needs to be addressed now, before those people become the middle managers and the upper manager, and they will become those people.
And the trans obsession as well, because I'm sorry, that hurts children. When you are pushing, that message to young children, and again, the CBBS, the news rounds, all of all that type of programming, they're obsessed with it. This is unhealthy. It's unscientific. It's not non-factless. The funny thing, the thing I really thought was funny yesterday was like, where's BBC Verify when you need them? I mean, when I've been approached by BBC Verify, they did a little piece. I can't remember something that I did, something to do with COVID, and I actually wrote back to them, hey, have you thought about investigating? And I gave them a long list of things that they could investigate of their own output. I find it extraordinary that we only just know about this Trump speech being doctored. I mean, the only reason we do it is because no one watches Panorama anymore, because we know how useless it is and how utterly biased it is. There are very, very, very few programmes in the news output that most people I know watch anymore, because you just know that you're not going to get much good. Spike the other day did a brilliant documentary, about a 40-minute documentary. He spoke about it on air with Tom Slater, the political editor. And they did a brilliant documentary about people who've been investigated for so-called speech and hate crimes. And I said to him, this is like a Panorama documentary when Panorama used to be good.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, though, you look at all the sort of the flagship shows, be it comedy, be it current affairs, be it opinion. I mean, everybody used to watch Question Time. Who watches it now? Nobody watches Newsnight now, because it's just descended into whatever the hell that is. Things like Have I Got News for You used to be sort of cornerstone.
Used to be good when I was on it. But I've been blackballed from all the shows that I used to be a regular on.
They're rubbish.
I was told, and I've been told by senior people that it's because of your views. Like, my views are completely mainstream.
I'll never get on them either, because I've association with you. This is all your fault. The nation has been denied.
But again, I mean, look, the BBC's been forced to create 2 Gaza stories a week. Just simple facts. We've got Jeremy Bowen still to this day standing by, reporting that the Hamas claims that Israel had bombed a hospital deliberately, when that simply was not true. And even afterward, he doesn't say, I shouldn't have listened to them, I shouldn't have taken their claims as truth. He stood by it. I mean, I mean, on what planet? On what planet? More than 200 Jewish staff accusing the BBC of ignoring their calls for a probe into anti-Semitism. We know we've got the Bailey report from a long time back, which they've never actually published. We've got gender zealots at the BBC trying to block an interview with J.K. Rowling because of her very problematic views on trans issues. I mean, she's a women's rights campaigner.
Well, she's a women's rights campaigner. She's perhaps one of the only truly successful examples of British soft power alive today.
Yeah.
Somebody who has single-handedly spawned an entire industry. Whatever her views are on anything, political or social, actually, this is somebody who deserves to be interviewed on the merit of their own work.
JK, I have you on the show every day of the week, my love. Come on.
But equally, the whole thing, the Gaza war has just warped all sorts of people, and also people, including, it must be said, respected journalists' ability to see what is news and what isn't. The fact of the matter is, we saw for months and months one side of the conflict, which was, here are people crying and shouting and saying it's genocide, and there's a war going on. Do we get to see any of the aspects of the war? No. Do we, we're told that there are sort of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian journalists. Do any of them actually sort of highlight anything other than the people crying? No. And you're thinking, well, that sounds an awful lot like propaganda. No. It was absolutely, treated as if it was news. And there was no curiosity about why is it that we're not seeing literally any of the other things you might see in a war zone.
Why are we never seeing footage of fighters taken into hospitals?
Exactly.
No, exactly. I mean, it is absolutely shocking. And again, while I've been away, seen some stats. The war in Sudan, more people have died in the war in Sudan in 1 week. In 1 week, by the way, where there is a literal famine, people are literally dying of starvation, and there is a literal ethnic genocide going on in Sudan. More people die in 1 week than in the entire 2-year plus of the war in Gaza. What does that tell you? And I'm still waiting for those marches every Saturday through London. Still waiting for them to start.
I mean, the appalling thing about that is, as we were saying, they would take the sort of the Hamas propaganda and go, oh, this is news. They're not called the Janjaweed anymore, the RSF. They literally film themselves going from village to village, shooting people, setting fire. Where's the outrage? That just doesn't get picked up. These people do not try to hide their atrocities. No. Nobody cares because it's Africans killing Africans, if we're honest.
Just as Hamas didn't hide their atrocities on October the 7th, absolutely. Sharon Davies, she's an Olympic medalist swimmer herself and author of the brilliant book Unfair Play, The Battle for Women's Sport. A good afternoon to you, Sharon.
Hello, Julia. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Delighted when I saw this news. We broke it on the show yesterday, and I said, well, get Sharon on for tomorrow. I want to talk to her about this. Tell us what's actually happening.
So basically, we've had a change of head, which I think probably a lot of people would have seen. Kirsty Coventry has come in. She was an ex-swimmer who I interviewed many times on the side of the pool instead of Tom Spack. And also we've had a change of head doctor to a lady who was an ex-international rower. So I think that's made quite a bit of difference. But I think the thing that's the biggest difference is the disastrous things that we saw at the Olympic Games in Paris last year, where we literally saw a male beating up a female in a boxing ring. And bearing in mind, yes, as sport, and everybody knew it. Everybody could see it. We knew that that person had been banned from previous boxing bouts because they had failed a sex screening test. And it was obvious with our own eyes, and this was literally, I felt, criminal negligence, the potential for someone to be very, very seriously hurt.
Well, one of the women basically said, she after a few minutes just went, I'm out. I can't risk this man punching me in the face. And this was someone who was not trans. This was a man who'd been incorrectly identified as female when he was born.
Yeah, so this is differences of sexual development, DSD, often gets confused, but actually the end result is that that person is still male.
Yeah.
And in fact, World Athletics have notified us that they've had 135 male DSDs with pretty much the same male DSD, 5ARD, which is what Caster Semenya has, that have taken part in track and field since 2000. Now, the IOC removed sex screening, even though they polled their female athletes in 1998, and 82% of women, elite athletes, said, yes, please keep screening going because it keeps our category safe and fair. They removed it. And since 2000, that's how many DSD athletes have just taken part in athletics. A lot more in boxing, football, believe me. So you're talking hundreds, okay?
No, but we're told it's only a few people. Why are you being so nasty and transphobic, Sharon? It's just a few people who we should be more kind to. Why are you being horrible?
Well, I mean, the point to all of this is really how you introduced it. What is the point of having separate categories if we're going to allow any man who has a DSD and was misdiagnosed when they were born, or is a man and has decided to identify because they feel like they are a female? I don't really understand how anyone can feel like someone they're not. because you don't know what it feels like to be a female because you're not a female. But whatever, that is the point. And so women's sport was literally thrown under the PC bus in 2015.
But not men's sport, because weirdly, trans-identifying women who think that they are men, weirdly, were not queuing up to compete against men. I wonder why.
Please give me one example of a trans-identifying female that's displaced an international male athlete ever. I mean, the UN gave us a report in 2024 showing us over 600 major international medals had gone to trans-identifying men in women's sport, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
And this is the thing, and it's happening in schools, in like counties, and happening in US colleges and lots of their sports as well.
It's the message we're giving young girls. I mean, here's the most heartbreaking story I've had, and I get them weekly and daily. But a mum of an 11-year-old daughter said to me, she'd come back from a school sports day. There was one little boy that was identifying as a girl in one of the classes. So the head had decided to run a co-ed sports day. She came home from school and went, not one little girl won a race on sports day anywhere. And she said, why am I bothering, Mum? And it literally reduced me to tears, because this is the message that we are giving our young girls at the moment. They are not worthy of their own category. And that's not right. We must include everybody in sport. Absolutely.
No, exactly. But it
has to be fair.
It's also ignoring the reason, as you say, why women's categories were brought in. It's because men and women are different, and I'm always flabbergasted by how many times we're told, no, but if a male athlete takes down his testosterone levels, then it's not.
None of that makes any difference.
So explain to people, explain for the hard of understanding at the back, why male athletes can pretty much always be female, because we know we've got some amazing stats put together, which I know you've quoted many times, where if you look at like the women's world record holders in many different fields, actually that world record could be beaten by the average 16-year-old,
14 to 15-year-old
male
boys.
athlete.
14 to 15-year-old boys world records.
Tell us what the difference is.
Most of all the women's track and field, swimming, cycling world records. So literally a teenage boy, because of course by the time they're teenage boys, they're producing quite a lot of testosterone. The whole testosterone reduction thing was ridiculous, because it started at 10 nanomals, then it went down to 5 nanomals. The average elite female athlete has less than 1 nanomol. But they haven't gone through male puberty. They haven't got bigger hands and feet. They haven't got a different Q angle, which is your hips to your knees, because obviously women have childbearing hips. This makes quite a big difference to your cadence and the power and the dynamism that you can put through your lower body. So it makes a huge difference in running, jumping, cycling, kicking and swimming, anything. That means that you're using your lower half, which is pretty much everything, isn't it? So we can't remove any of that, and we have WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency. The whole point of WADA is to stop people from getting the tiniest unfair advantage. And yet we were prepared to let men go into women's sport and just say, women, suck it up.
But what amazes me is how many women were pushing this because they're being nice, but also how many women athletes sort of went along and stayed quiet. But was that because there was peer pressure and basically if you spoke out, we know certainly in American colleges, if you spoke out about having to compete in the swimming contest against Leah Thomas, 6-foot+ bloke who used to wander around with his todger swinging in the changing rooms.
Twice a day, every day
very deliberately just flaunting it. And by the way, he was a very average male swimmer, but suddenly as a competing in female sport, he was suddenly so much better. Imagine everyone's surprise. But any woman who spoke out was basically told, you're going to lose your funding. You're off the team. Is that were women intimidated into keeping quiet?
Yeah, there has been an atmosphere of fear, hasn't it? I mean, that's the thing.
People have tried to
tiny,
lose
loud
you
minority, that make the people's lives hell. So people keep their heads down. I mean, I had another father that wrote to me and said his 15-year-old daughter was being made to play against male footballers. Now, she was quite good. She was in an elite program and she'd started self-harming and not eating. And I said, then why do other fathers feel the same way? She said, oh, yes, all of us do. I said, well, why on earth don't you get together and stop it? This is your child. And they still wouldn't do it, right? So the intimidation has been extraordinary. The silencing of people's voices. I did a Twitter poll. It's Twitter. I know it's only Twitter, but it is a reflection of the general public. And 60,000 people responded in 24 hours. And this was like 3 or 4 years ago now. And 97% said they think that women should have their own fair and safe category.
It's not controversial.
The general public have always been on side, and yet here we are with very weak CEOs that are bowing to DEI hires sitting on their boards, and they're all petrified of them to turn around and to present science. Not once has the science ever supported allowing males to
and
go
we're
into
often told, but there's some new evidence. No, the evidence was always the same.
Evidence was always there.
It was very interesting. I remember. I know she works works with Sex Matters as well as you often do, Nicola Williams from Fair Play for Women, speaking to her on, we were back in an old studio in an old building back in,
10 years
10 plus years ago, and absolutely fascinating. And I remember saying to we need to push the sport angle, 100% the sport angle, because once you get dads, men care about sport more than women on average. I'm being very general, but that is the simple case when it comes to spectators and things like that. And dads will care about it a lot more. Mums want to be nice, want everyone to like them. Dads won't care when their daughter is being, basically roughed up on the field by a boy, twice her size. And I always knew sport was going to be the real battlefield here, that we would get some sanity, and it has proven to be the case. But
yeah, we're still not winning though. There's still 34 sports here in the UK, which allows people to self-identify, right? I mean, and some of those are contact sports.
But is that not illegal now since the Supreme Court ruling?
It should be. And so we are going to start trying to push back. Myself and Tracy Edwards are going to form an organisation called the Women's Sports Union, and we are going to fight back, and we are going to try very politely to present all of the news. We are going to try very politely to tell them that they're actually don't have public liability insurance that's credible anymore, because it's breaking the law.
Yep.
And then if they still won't listen to us, then we're going to have to go down the legal route. But because you've been talking about this for years, this is the only way that women have had open to push back, is to crowdfund and to constantly go to the courts.
I'm happy to help with the crowdfunding.
Because we've been silenced by people like the BBC. I mean, thank goodness for yourselves and GB News, and the Telegraph and the Times, who have given us a voice, because an awful lot of the mainstream media has not given women a voice. They've just thrown away our rights as if it didn't matter.
I mean, bearing in mind Women's Hour, which is a laughably offensive programme anyway to be in existence. The other 23 hours are for men. But Women's Hour, for all those years, Miss Wokemma Barnett never touched the trans issue once. I mean, give me a break. The biggest single issue and impact on women's rights and safety in the last 10 years, never mentioned it.
I think sadly women have just been beaten over the head with this be kind, and the be kind never ever applies to women.
Well, not you. You are, I mean, I'm your biggest fan. I mean, genuinely, Sharon Davies, you're doing a wonderful thing, not just for other top athletes like yourself, but also for, our little girls as well. Breaking news we've had in the last 10 minutes that asylum seekers can continue to be housed at the Bell Hotel in Essex. This after Epping Forest District Council failed to secure a High Court injunction that would block them from living there. We have this bizarre situation, haven't we, where we've had, this is of course the hotel where Hadoush Kabati was accused and convicted and now deported at long last of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl, and, wrongly released, now deported. I mean, he'll probably be back again on the next dingy round next week, no doubt. But we're in this absurd situation where we had the Home Office fighting to keep asylum seekers in the hotel against the wishes of the council and the local people, at the same time as having an official policy to get asylum seekers out of these hotels. But what do you make of this court judgment?
Well, I think it's a real insult to the people of that area who have had particular problems. I mean, there's been problems at many of the hotels housing asylum seekers and migrants, but this has been such a focus of attention because of the serious nature of the behaviour of one or two of the people who've been in there. But the judge has said this, and presumably the government will be delighted, because it looks like they've won in a case that they did not accept that the protests were genuine. They kept implying that it was people from the far right who'd come in to protest, and it was just, on the whole, ordinary people who just felt concerned,
local mums,
and worried, but those mums will still be worried now. And it also shows, I mean, the government could have used this hotel as an opportunity to say, to show that they really meant they were going to get people out of hotels and placed elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm in a bind on this one, because I'm not sure I want people out of hotels. They want them out of hotels, they reckon, to save money. It's £145 a night on average instead of £35 a night, depending on the accommodation they get. Or if they're just going to put them into, bed sits, they're going to be hidden in the community. I think that's more dangerous.
I think the worry there is that it's going to cause real anger of people who are on the housing waiting list and have been for a very long time, and see their local council suddenly giving up 100, 200 places to people who've not been in the country very long. And when we look at the fact that since the one in, one out was started, 13,000, I think over 13,000 migrants had come in. I mean, there were 500 the other day came in, and yet there's something like a dozen, if even that, have been sent away and they've come back. So, you know, it's not going to solve the real crisis. And I think that, you know, if the government was serious about protecting their borders, they would be having the Royal Navy or some elements of the military involved in stopping the crossings.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've also got the hokey cokey of yet another migrant who's come here, been detained, deported back to France, given, you know, a few thousand quid as a result, you know, and then we pay for their flight and everything. And now they've come back again, apparently on Sunday, and now they're going to be deported again. And the government laughably says, well, it shows the system is working because we're able to identify this person.
I genuinely could not understand how any logic could say. I mean, they didn't explain the logic, but I couldn't understand the logic. And of course, what was interesting is that what they're supposedly saying is that the migrants are saying when they go sent back, France is not refusing to give them any kind of accommodation, any kind of help or support, and they're going to be back staying in camps again, which just shows what we've always been saying, that there is a pull factor. We are so nice to people. I'm not suggesting that we you know, suddenly start, you know, being incredibly cruel, but the reality is these are people who are coming, who have no right to be here, who are coming illegally, and then we are treating them better than we treat our veterans lying on the streets in London.
Absolutely. Look, let me also talk about, you know, immigration, a huge big issue, obviously, but also conversation about the BBC these days, but also, look, you know, is the economy stupid? It always comes back to that. We've got the budget coming up in a couple of weeks. Rachel Reeves has, in various statements and an interview yesterday at the Beeb, she has made very strong hints. Yes, income tax is going to go up, although national insurance for workers will go down the equivalent amount. But so if you're an average earner, a low earner, you should see no difference. But higher earners, pensioners and others will see a substantial difference in their taxes. But also, crucially, she said she is, well, basically saying that children shouldn't be penalised for being born into bigger families. Strongest hint yet that she's going to scrap the two-child benefit cap, which is worth best part of 1,500 quid a year per child over the first two you have. Is she right to do that?
Well, I think there should have been a warning that when this was started, that in 5 years' time we will stop this, or in 3 years' time we will stop this, and then that would have given people the opportunity to realise that if they go on and want to have lots of children, then the taxpayer should not have to pay for them.
But hold on a minute. When this was brought in by the Tories, they were very clear that anyone who already had children before that date were not penalised.
Oh, well, then in that case...
No, April, and so it only counts for any child born after April 2017.
Well, then, I probably, a lot of your listeners viewers would disagree, but I don't think it should be removed. I think that it's quite sensible. And, there is absolutely no reason for people to have 4, 5, 6 children. And of course, the reason
they can have as many kids as they want, but they don't have a right to ask the rest of us to pay for them.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. And I'm afraid there is a little bit of, there probably in some areas where there are very high proportions of people coming from a different culture who like to have more or have tended to have more children, then I think that's something that within Labour MPs who are representing those seats, perhaps they think that might not.
Well, yeah. I mean, the impact is greater. Again, it's a terrible policy because the impact is it hits poorer families. Well, of course it does. They're the only ones claiming universal credit, and also bigger impact on ethnic minorities and immigrant families. Exactly. 1 in 5 children born of Pakistani heritage is affected, and 1 in 4 Bangladeshi children of heritage are affected. I mean, that tells you everything. But again, at the same time, families coming to this country or being, children growing up in this country as British citizens, but asking, saying, this is how many children I want to have. Mum, almost certainly in a Pakistani and Bangladeshi family, I've seen the stats on this, are unlikely to be working. The dad working but not earning enough to support that many children in this country, but they're expecting other parents, by the way, of all religions and colours, etc., to pay for their children, who then have to pay more tax and can't afford to pay to have more children of their own. There is an impact of this on other families.
Yes, it's not just the family that's directly affected, but it affects all of us. And we are going to see in this budget, I can't imagine how they think that it's going to actually help Labour's position in the polls if some of the rumours. And I don't understand why we've been, yesterday in the House of Lords, we had a Treasury Minister who every single question during the 10 minutes refused to answer, basically saying, I can't comment because we're coming up, to the budget. I can't comment. And yet, the Chancellor herself made a speech last week, which brought out all sorts of speculation. I mean, it used to be that budgets were totally nobody knew anything.
Oh, yeah. And if anything was revealed, everyone involved got sacked.
You were in trouble, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the world has definitely changed. Exactly, you say it's a bit of a nonsense. So I can't say anything, except what I do say. They're trying to sort of, roll the pitch, so we're all expecting it to be very, very bad indeed. And hopefully it won't be as bad as we expect, but I have a horrible feeling it'll be even worse than we expect. And it's always...
But Julia, can I say what the best news today is, and you mentioned it earlier, is the moves from the Olympic Association, because that really is going to change so much when it comes to the discrimination and effect on
banning men from women's sport. Who'd have thought that was a controversial? Let's talk to Mike Neville. He's a former Metropolitan Police Detective Chief Inspector and joins us to talk about, the prevent strategy and also an amazing arrest of 145 suspects in shoplifting crackdown. Nice of the police to bother, eh, Mike?
Yes, it is, Julia, and there's all sorts of offences. It was over a week-long period in the West End, the Met crackdown on all sorts of thieving and antisocial behaviour. So it's good to see the police focusing on crime, isn't it, rather than doing silly things. So it is a step forward that thieves are being arrested, those who target women are being put in the cells.
I mean, they should have thought of this before. Can I just say that if you did a week-long crackdown in the West End and you only ended up with 140 suspects, you've not done a crackdown. I could find you 140 suspects on my local high street.
Well, absolutely. I dealt with thieves who was committing 10, 20 crimes per day, so these are very active people. And there's people go to the West End, obviously, to steal from tourists. It's an easy peasy, isn't it? And also to target the high value and low value shops. What always amazed me about society, Julie, is that one of the most shoplifted places in London is Primark on Oxford Street.
They're virtually giving it away for free. My local, I'm not joking, my local Poundland had to close down because it had so much stuff stolen. You think, I mean, really? Of all the places, if you're going to get done for shoplifting, maybe you want to go a little bit higher end. But it's also, I mean, again, still waiting, by the way, to see when they're going to actually track down the man who's accused of stealing my handbag. June last year, still waiting for that. So police are obviously busy doing other things. But I'll tell you what we are worried about is the prevent counter-terrorism strategy, though. According to a new report, an independent commission, they say that 90% of people who are referred to the strategy, which is supposed to catch people who are, danger to the society, are being turned away because they haven't got an obvious ideology. So they're saying that there's no longer keeping the country safe. It needs a radical overhaul. And this, of course, came to horrible, horrible notice of the public July last year with Axel Rudikabana, who had been referred to prevent repeatedly. But because he wasn't obviously, an Islamist or obviously a Nazi, they kind of went, nothing to do with us, Gov. And then he went on to kill 3 children and attempt to kill 8 others.
In the most brutal and horrible, wicked way as well. Yeah. And I think the Al-Qaeda handbook that was found in his house sort of gives us some kind of indications here. And the other ridiculous thing, I suppose, Julie, is that also twice as many people are referred to prevent for alleged far-right activities than for Islamic terrorist matters. Yeah. And we know what the real threat is to this country. There are not twice as many deaths through far-right activities as opposed to Islamic terrorism. And we've got to get...
I think like 90% of terror attacks and of deaths in this country are Islamist terrorism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without doubt, we know people are dead. You can't bluff that one out. And also these things are just woke, aren't they? We saw the ridiculous nonsense where Axel Rudikabana's headmistress said she'd been told she couldn't describe him as sinister because that's a really awful word to use about children. And saying he was carrying knives was stereotyping him because he was a young black man. So when you
who was carrying knives?
Yeah. So when you've got an organisation whose job is to prevent, really serious evil deeds being done, but it's just handicapped by these woke ideologies, and also this, you always got this business of, it's going to be 50-50, the far right as bad as the Islamic terrorists, and that's the idea in these people's heads, and it's got to be stopped, because what it does, it's failing the public, and really worse than that, it's allowing children to be murdered.
They've literally got blood on their hands. Enemies of the BBC for stoking the bias scandal engulfing the corporation. The broadcast is the very best of society. Those two statements are exactly what's wrong with the BBC. They're delusional about the problem. The problem is you and the work that you guys have done. You did something against every journalistic ethic, and not just over Donald Trump, over Israel, over the trans issue, over climate change. You don't obey the... When I did my local newspaper training, and when I did my journalism course, and yes, I know it doesn't feel like it, but I was actually trained. I get journalist inverted commas on social media. Really spent a lot of money on that course. And if I'd done some of the things that they'd done, I'd have been failed. You'd have literally got a fail on the course, because it's so, the journalistic practice is so bad. And yet he's saying we are the best of society. But that's the other issue. They genuinely think they're better than us. If they are the very best, we must be below them, right? They think that they're the guiding hand of goodness and niceness and virtue. Having to provide education, indoctrination and propaganda to us horrible, bigoted, stupid plebs. Yeah. That's literally what he means by that.
It is, and the BBC is some kind of holier-than-thou attitude. And when sort of listening to that, it was like when people are going through a breakup and they start blaming everybody else. It was always that person over there, that's their fault, don't like your friends anyway, never liked your mum. It was that kind of attitude. Everybody else was out to get him, and all the BBC were doing were being morally right.
No, you had an affair. That's why we're breaking up. I mean, that's the thing.
But it is, and listening to it, and they feel that they're so morally ahead of everybody else.
They really do, though. And that's why they cannot, and therefore anyone who criticises them must be a bad person. Yeah. Because they think they are better than us. I mean, the broadcast is the very best of society. That means the rest of us are below. I'm really sorry for trying to actually, promote, truth. I mean, I think that what we do on this station is genuinely public service broadcasting, trying to put out the facts, trying to actually provide, different levels of debate. We're not afraid of other people disagreeing with us or having that debate. Never. I mean, what amazes me is how many people who I disagree with will go, I don't want to come on. So, what? You can have the platform. What are you scared of? What are you scared of?
But that's what debate is. It's being able to have the benefit of a space where you can have that discussion, you can have a disagreement. It's fine. Nobody's going to be offended. And if you think you're right, you should be able to defend your... There's no one I wouldn't debate with, because I couldn't defend my arguments. We had Donald Trump speaking in an American TV interview, said he's got an obligation to sue the BBC. He's waiting for that apology by Friday, but he's already had the apology. That's the thing. We had the resignations of Tim Davie and Deborah Turness, the head of BBC News. We had those resignations on Sunday night, and that was after they had received a letter from Donald Trump's personal lawyer saying, they demanded an apology. So there was that apology, sort of. There were the resignations, and he's still saying he has an obligation to sue. It's almost sort of comical, isn't it? Because I understand why he's doing it, and I think he's got every right to be very angry at the clip. This is his words, his speech was misconstrued in a particularly egregious way.
Misrepresented.
It was misrepresented.
It wasn't a mistake.
It was a fraudulently put together clip, and they need to own up to that. Yep. With him suing the BBC, I don't actually think it's going to happen. Just the complications of the legalities. There will be a payoff. They need to apologise a lot better. Not a "I'm sorry if you were offended" kind of apology, but an absolute proper
it's going to have
on
to
your
be.
knees. I apologise. We were wrong. Mea culpa. And have done.
And you deliberately misleading the public by deliberately splicing together two parts of the speech to distort what was said by the then presidential candidate. He was still he was actually still president, wasn't he? In January 2021. But again, the show went out just ahead ahead of the 24 election. They did that. The enemies of the... I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Defrauding the BBC didn't do that. Nigel Farage didn't do that. Kenny Badenoch didn't do that. You did that, not us.
But now, after what's happened in the last 24 hours, I'm wondering whether he'll last till Christmas. I mean, the budget is going to be a huge hurdle for this government. It's going to be either bad news on the day, or it will become clear within days that it's bad news generally.
Yeah.
And it's something that will involve a lot of broken promises. And that's what this government is now identified with. I mean, whatever happened to truth, honesty, integrity, and accountability?
When did we have that in British politics?
Well, we did. I mean,
when?
I'm even older than you. I'm a lot older than you.
I didn't know that was possible.
I can remember back decades before when people actually took responsibility for their errors.
Yeah.
People like Lord Carrington resigned over the Falklands, for goodness sake.
True.
Can you imagine that happening today, either in the Tory party or in this particular government?
Yeah, that is a very fair point there. That really is. But this is the thing. I mean, it is absolute chaos. We all, you and I would have discussed this. I think, I saw you even on the night of the election. Everyone expected it to be a Labour victory, not quite the landslide it was, that collapse of that Tory vote. But I think we all knew they would be a bit rubbish. But I don't think anyone thought they were going to be this bad. But the Prime Minister, I mean, he's got a Chief of Staff who's plotting against a senior member of his cabinet. Particularly foolish, like doing that briefing when Wes Streeting was on the media round and is a absolutely brilliant media performer and batted it away, looking rather more like a leader than Keir Starmer did at PMQs yesterday. He just handed a weapon to the opposition and to opposition with his own party. But if you've got a Chief of Staff when you've got 0.1% growth, which is in that, and as Henry Hill, who's with me, pointed out, that's not even per capita. So we're worse than flatlining. You've got unemployment up, inflation still high. You've got welfare bills ballooning, debt ballooning, all of the problems we've got. NHS waiting list, coming down, but at the slowest pace ever. Strikes going on. I mean, you name it, everything is going wrong. And the Chief of Staff in number 10 has got time to do plotting against a potential future, leadership plotter. I mean, that he should be sacked on the spot, shouldn't he?
Well, he should be, but if he did, so would Keir Starmer. They're twinned. I mean, one goes with the other. I mean, this clumsy, bungled attempt to cut Wes Streeting off at the knees has actually given his leadership chance his legs. It's an amazing act of appalling political judgment here. And everyone's piling in. As you said, Ed Miliband is now saying that Morgan McSweeney's got to be sacked. Well, he's not saying this because he thinks that he wants Wes Streeting as the next leader. And he doesn't really want Keir Starmer to remain as leader. He wants to be leader, despite his protestations to the opposite.
And he went so well last time he was leader.
I know. We all realised we missed out there, didn't we?
No, but that's it. They're all up to it, aren't they? What do you make of the claim, which gets more allies of Keir Starmer, apparently, are talking about how, but if there were a change of leadership, there would have to be a general election. I mean, certainly they called for general elections when the Tories kept changing their leaders. Constitutionally, there doesn't have to be a change of leader, but is there anyone in the Labour Party who could feasibly get elected? I mean, that's a big, proviso as leader of the party, who could change Labour's fortunes?
Well, I think that Wes Streeting is probably the best of the bunch. And I think that because of that, and because there are people in the party like Ed Miliband who are totally on the other side of the political spectrum, he's unlikely to get it because the party at large, which will have a big say, likes Ed Miliband. I mean, the rest of the country hates Ed Miliband, but that's irrelevant in this. I mean, what this has suddenly brought upon us is the realization, which has dawned on us, that we could actually be facing another election much sooner than we expected. And that concentrates the mind because we've assumed we've got 2 or 3 years for Nigel Farage to get his policy act together, for the Conservatives to do whatever they need to do to become a serious party of opposition again. And suddenly, if we did have an election, say, in the early new year, would those parties be ready to actually fight back and present us with an alternative government? And I worry that at this stage, Nigel Farage hasn't quite put all the nuts and bolts
together.
No,
they haven't got the policy, but they are planning for a 2027 election. We're going to be talking to Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform, in an hour or so's time. But as you say, that said, given the state of the polls right now, would Labour backbenchers be voting to dissolve Parliament? Because it's not going to happen without them voting for it, and they dissolve Parliament and then risk losing their own seats. At the end of the day, they want to pay their mortgages too.
Well, I mean, look, there would be turkeys voting for Christmas, but on the other hand, they're going to have to get rid of Keir Starmer. They know that. They know they can't go into the next election with him as leader. And so really there's no good time to get rid of him, now or after the May elections. Yeah. It's still bad for Labour because, I mean, they're going to be annihilated in the local elections. What happened if they changed leader then? There'd still be a demand for an early general election from that point onwards. So basically, they're biding their time. So you're quite right. You might as well carry on drawing your pay for a while until you're finally redundant, as many will be, rather than meeting it too soon.
What do you make of some other little troublesome issues for the Prime Minister? One is his ethics advisor, Sir Laurie Magnus, rebuking the Prime Minister over the appointment of a Labour donor to the position of football regulator. He said it was regrettable that he approved David Cogan to the position, even though he'd agree because he's received so much hospitality from football clubs. But there's also an issue involving Tim Allen, the new sort of senior sort of director of communications, a man I know you'll know well from Blairite years, in Number 10, and his still close links with the lobbying firm that he founded alongside Tom Baldwin, another former Labour advisor, but also a journalist. I mean, there just seem to be just sort of, I don't know, issues everywhere coming out of the woodwork.
Well, as I said earlier, what happened to truth, accountability and integrity? I mean, this is yet another example of Labour doing things they accuse the Tories of basically breaking the law over. And we've had such a catalogue of these mistakes, misdemeanors. And in my case, actually, I think that this is far worse. I think we've got a government which is very sleazy. It has no credibility. I think it has no integrity. And I think that the fact that they've lost a minister for housing, or because of her juggling the rent, we've lost a minister for business integrity. I mean, it's for corruption, for being corrupt. I mean,
well, allegations.
Of course. I mean, that's why she went anyway, because of those allegations, which have yet to be proved or refuted properly. Yeah. However, the simple fact is that this government goes on a daily basis from one of these horrible crises to another. And our reputation abroad, I think, has taken a hell of a pasting as a result.
Oh, well, I'm just hoping people aren't noticing. Let's talk about the chaos in Number 10, because we've got accusations of plotting and demands for the sacking or the resignation of Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Did the Prime Minister know or not know? Have his aides gone rogue, or has he been directing them to plot against the likes of the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting and others? He had to apologise, the Prime Minister, to Wes Streeting last night over those briefings about a leadership plot. No doubt at all the Prime Minister is weaker now rather than stronger after this. What do you think is going on, and should any heads roll, and if so, whose?
Well, I can tell you that actually this has been building and bubbling for at least 9 days. I was aware at the beginning of last week of not one but 4 separate leadership teams for 4 separate cabinet ministers.
Name them. Wes Streeting, Siobhan Mahmood, Ed Miliband, who else?
I'm going to leave that to your expertise, Julia. But,
David Lammy.
I'm going to leave that to your expertise, but I can tell you that this has been building. This is not just a sort of a one-day element of madness from someone in the Number 10 bunker, but it is a bunker. They are completely hunkered down, and they know that this is, at some point, this is coming. And we're heading towards a budget in a couple of weeks' time, which is very, very likely to be the last budget by this Chancellor and the last budget that's enjoyed by this Prime Minister. Yeah. That's my prediction. Change is coming in this Labour government over the next 6 to 12 months, big time.
Well, that's a lot of people are saying, Donald, I mean, no question at all, Keir Starmer, he's got that big majority, he'll last 10 years. I remember thinking, yeah, right. I'd always said Labour are going to get elected, but they'll last one term because I know how bad they're going to be. And now people are talking about he'll be lucky to survive next summer or possibly by Christmas. As you mentioned, the budget is the big tripwire, and the proof is going to certainly be in the local elections, the Scottish and Welsh elections, where I know Reform has been making a play. Lots of talk, though. If there were a new leader, there'd have to be a general election. Now, constitutionally, we've just been discussing, there doesn't have to be, but bearing in mind that Keir Starmer is our shadow Brexit secretary in the 2019 election, he was the one who said we needed to have a second referendum because people didn't know what they were voting for in 2016 when they voted for Brexit. So you could argue, you know, they didn't know they were voting for an Ed Miliband or a Wes Streeting or a Shabana Mahmood premiership, so we'd have to get a general election. Are you ready for a general election as early as next year?
There's not going to be an election next year. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. But if there's some financial drama over the next couple of years, then sort of after the second half of 2027, thereafter anything could happen, and we would be ready for that time frame.
Why is it going to happen in 2077 but not 2026?
As I say, if there's a financial drama...
OK, so why wouldn't that financial drama happen after the budget or in January?
The point is, we're heading towards a drama, but you never quite know when it's going to be. I'm just saying that's a more likely time frame. And we've got GDP figures out this morning showing effectively no growth whatsoever in the last 3 months, complete flatlining. And given the amount of money that's being poured into the public sector, the fact that we've borrowed 100 billion quid in the first 6 months of this year, essentially the private sector is in recession. Jobs are being slaughtered all over the country. And the bond markets at some point are going to say, hang on, you're borrowing all this money, you're not increasing your value. In fact, the value's going down. This can't carry on. And so there has to be a day of reckoning, a day of significant change where the government of the day says we've got to stop wasting public sector spending all over the place on vast pay rises with no productivity requirements, gold-plated defined benefit pension schemes that are a huge liability for the country. And we've got to get back to a sensible situation where actually it pays to go to work, and it pays to take some risk by being an entrepreneur and a small business owner. Yeah, and that's what we've been highlighting in the last couple of weeks.
And that's something that a lot of people would agree with. I think a lot of people who don't even vote to reform. Can I ask you, just sticking on the leadership, just the last question, is there another Labour leader that you would prefer to be battling against at the next general election other than Keir Starmer? Would it be better or worse for you if it was Wes Streeting or Shabana Mahmood or David Lammy or Ed Miliband?
Oh, I think Keir Starmer's doing a splendid job for reform. He really is being most helpful. We're most grateful. I think Ed Miliband would also be most helpful to reform with his eco-zealotry and his obsession with net stupid zero. Again, I think that would also help reform and people realise the madness of their plan. So, yeah, this is all to play for. We're working hard. We're looking forward to the May elections. 5,500 candidates, Julia. It's an absolutely massive one, and there's a lot to be done. But we're pushing on. I will, in fairness, credit where credit's due, Julia. There's some good news by the government today. They've announced they're going to abolish the Police and Crime Commission.
Yeah, I was just going to get to that.
Yeah, give that responsibility to elected mayors. I think that actually is a sensible move. Finally, there's something where we can go.
And you approve of that move on cost basis or accountability basis? On what basis?
On accountability basis, it makes it easier for voters to know that actually the mayor. Lots of people are sort of questioning, why do we need a mayor? Why do we need a police and crime commissioner? Well, if you merge the two, then it's clearer the accountability and the responsibility. And chief constables do need to be held to account. They can't just essentially have no accountability. And so I think this is a sensible measure. Look, it's an experiment that's been tried for the last, whatever it is, decade or so, and it hasn't worked. So,
well, also very few people. I think it's under 20% of people in local elections even vote for these people, and they've not really held chief constables to account. If they had, we wouldn't have people being arrested for non-crime hate incidents and hurty tweets, and we might have some shoplifters arrested. Keir Starmer's currently, he's in Anglesey in North Wales. The government has confirmed that Anglesey is going to get the UK's first small modular nuclear reactor. I think Liz Kendall is speaking right now. Ed Miliband's been speaking. They all want to be in on it. I mean, this is a policy you would also support, is it not?
It is, and we've been very proud.
Look, you're going to be a Labour voter at this rate, Richard.
Well, no, but hear me out. The issue is, why is it going to take 10 years to build them? Actually, they could be built much faster. That's the key thing. And the civil service and this government are being far, far too slow in approving these plans and getting on with it. It's dither and delay all the way along. Look, I think all parties are pro the SMRs. It's clearly good for Britain that these are primarily British Rolls-Royce SMRs. There are
small modular
reactors. Yeah. There are other ones that are out there as well. But look, it's good for Britain. It's good for energy security. But once again, they're just taking far too long over it. And a reform government would get on with it and would get these things built faster, sooner, using, very importantly, British steel. Absolutely vital. I was truly shocked to hear just yesterday of a warship recently delivered to the Royal Navy that had precisely 0% of British manufactured steel. I mean, you can't make some of this stupidity up. But that, of course, was instructed by the Tories.
OK. Let's also talk about the doctors' strike. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, when he's not fending off accusations of a leadership plot, has now accused the Doctors' Union, BMA, of behaving like a cartel. Because they are the only doctors' union holding everyone to basically over a barrel for a bigger pay rise. They've had a 29% pay rise, far more than any other public sector worker, probably most in private sector as well. Doctors still claim they are still earning far less than they did before austerity hit under the Tories. What would you do to deal with doctor strikes if you were, I don't know, presumably Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, the simple thing is that the government did not impose any form of performance pay. They didn't introduce any productivity requirements. So surprise, surprise, the unions have just taken the mickey and they've come straight back round the table for more. It's what we see with socialism, hard left socialism. This happens time and time again. And everybody has to perform, everybody has to deliver and be held to account. And I think what we're seeing is, and there is a small cartel of disruptive union leaders at the BMA. I mean, most doctors and most people on the front line of healthcare actually despair at the BMA. It is a rogue organisation, and it is sort of completely negative towards improving healthcare. It's just that they just want to disrupt and be difficult, and that's incredibly unhelpful to the health of our nation.
Can I ask, would you make any changes to doctors' working practices? We see a huge number of doctors now as GPs working part-time, partly because their GPs got a pay rise that meant that they could pay all their mortgages, pay their costs, working 3 days a week, not 5 days a week, and not even weekends anymore. Many doctors working in the NHS who, we've subsidised their, even though they've paid tuition fees for those years of training, but we've subsidised their training to the tune of the best part of £250,000 each of them, are also choosing to work part-time once qualified. Would you make a requirement that doctors, given the overstretched services, given the lack of resources, given the long waiting list, that actually if you want to work for the NHS, but you want to get trained here, be subsidised, you've got to work for the NHS, and when you work for the NHS for a period of time, you have to work full-time?
Well, the first thing is healthcare should still be free at the point of delivery. We make that absolutely clear. But of course, it can, all the delivery of all healthcare can be improved, whether it's doctors' working practices, the mismanagement of whether it's GP surgeries, whether it's the way the pharmacies are currently operating, whether it's the way that hospitals and diagnostic centres are being run. All the frontline healthcare staff tell me that there's not a shortage of money, it's just the way that it's wasted and spent and mismanaged. That's the key thing that we've got to change, and that requires some changes in processes and practices across the board.
And surely also in personnel.
Well, yeah, in terms of the management, you've got to change the quality of management, reduce the unnecessary tiers of bureaucracy, which is all over the place. Have I got a Bible of answers here today, Julia? No. Will we have, by the time of the next election, Pretty much, yes.
But not if it's in 2026. Let me ask you also about the Employment Rights Bill, the Workers' Rights Bill. This was being very much pushed by the former Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. But yet more challenges coming within the House of Lords, actually, talking about how this Workers' Rights Bill will open up businesses to years of litigation from employers who want to work from home. Basically, the bill tells employers, I mean, basically, the moment someone's hired, they've got all the workers' rights normally you require after 1 or 2 years. But it's also going to tell employers they can only turn down requests to work remotely if they can show it's not a reasonable request, which is going to be very much a personal judgment call. What would you do in terms of those rights if you were in charge?
This whole bill is a disaster. I'm hearing from businesses, they're just stopping recruitment. And tragically, do you know who they're most stopping recruitment for, Julia? Young people. Yep. 18 to 21-year-olds, and it's a disaster. And tens and tens of thousands of youngsters are missing out now, as we speak, on their first jobs because of this. And you've got to scrap the whole Employment Rights Bill, lock, stock, and barrel. Frankly, you've got to scrap most of what this government's done since day one, except what we talked about earlier. And it's a catastrophe. It's an extra cost on businesses. Many of whom are now, bizarrely sort of saying, well, I'd rather employ a 65-year-old than an 18-year-old. This is just utterly ludicrous.
Would you, in terms of working practices in government, would it be reform policy that if you work in Whitehall, you need to be at a desk at 9 a.m. in Whitehall?
There's no question that being in the office delivers higher productivity. There are moments, of course, where you've got to read a really boring report, or you've got to write a report.
Or write a boring report.
Yeah, and you're better to do that with a cold towel over your head and a nice glass of something at home, stuck in a bed. That's fine. We all get that. But basically, when you're sort of sharing knowledge, sharing best practice, coming up with great new ideas, that's best done in and around the office.
Okay.
And I think we all know that.
Finally, I just want to ask you about BBC. We're told they are preparing to issue an apology to Donald Trump for that, apparently just a mistake. Not politically motivated, not institutionally biased at all, but just a mistake in splicing together two parts of a speech 54 minutes apart to make it look like Donald Trump had basically urged violence at the head of the January the 6th riots. Now, there's going to be an apology, we expect. There's probably also likely to be a payoff, not $1 billion, if there was a lawsuit, but a payoff of some sort. Should any of taxpayers' money, which is what the licence fee is, should that be given to Donald Trump?
Well, the key thing is that if the BBC is fulsome and totally contrite in its apology and explains how this could never ever happen again, then I would expect that that would be sufficient. I mean, they might make some form of offer of a donation to a charity or something. Those are normally the ways through when this sort of thing happens.
But that's our money.
Yes, but here's the point about accountability. That means we can then hold the BBC to account for its catastrophic failures, not only over the sort of interference with an overseas election, but also with its pro-Hamas stance, also with its ludicrous pro-trans stance, also with its ludicrous pro-net zero stance, which, by the way, they've announced a climate change review, which I'm insisting is an independent review. Mm-hmm. Given that I was a victim of some of their bias when I was on Question Time a few months back. And so the list goes on, and change is coming and accountability is coming. And if this costs the BBC something, well, all the more reason to demand major changes. And 2 people resigning is not enough. A wholesale change and clear out is required. And Nigel talked the other day that actually part of that wholesale rethink is a rethink of the way the BBC is funded.